Aloha, friends. It's Robert Stehlik. Welcome to another episode of the Blue Planet Show, where I interview foiling thought leaders, designers, and athletes. You can watch the Blue Planet Show right here on YouTube or listen to it as a podcast. Just search in your favorite podcast app for the Blue Planet Show. Today's show is with Dave Kalama, who's been an innovator not just in foiling, but before that in windsurfing, tow-in surfing, tow-in foiling, stand-up paddleboarding. He's brought all those things to the masses, made us aware of all these cool new ways to enjoy the ocean. Now he's creating leading-edge designs for foiling, widely used and copied by many other designers and brands. So he's always been a thought leader and design leader, and it's my pleasure to get him on the Blue Planet Show and have a great conversation with him. Thanks so much, Dave, for making the time. And without further ado, here is Dave Kalama.
Hey, Robert, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm doing great. It's early in the morning here in Hawaii, so you've been busy, I'm sure. And we just had the Molokai to Oahu foiling race, and there's a lot of people using your boards. How does that make you feel?
It feels great. It's weird. For me, the goal never was or never has been to see how many people I can get riding the boards. It's always been how good can I make the boards, like the challenge of it. And I've always focused on that. And yes, selling them is necessary if I want to keep doing that. But the vision for me never entailed looking out and seeing a bunch of boards. It was just always more in the shaping room and envisioning design characteristics and concepts and always trying to make the wheel just a little bit rounder.
It's crazy how much stand-up foiling has kind of blown up. Like just in the last few years, like from being a super elite sport. Now there's like in the Maui to Molokai race, there was like I think 120 people on stand-up foil boards doing it, and almost everybody was able to cross. So when just a few years ago, it was just like a handful of people could do it, and I think a big part of that has to do with the boards you designed. That like basically everybody's using long, narrow foil boards now. So talk a little bit about how that came about, like how that you got into those making those boards.
Yeah, I guess the original impetus for the whole thing was several years ago. I saw that prone foiling seemed to be growing at a much higher rate than stand-up foiling was. And I was already downwinding at that point, and I was already blowing my mind how amazing it was. Um, and I just felt like all these prone foilers that think riding waves is the beginning and end, and there's nothing beyond that, have no idea how much they're missing out in the ocean. But I knew it would never happen if they had to switch over to stand up or to paddling. At least in my original concept, I didn't feel like most prone paddlers would be willing to accept using a paddle.
Mhm.
So I felt like I've got to figure out how to make these boards so efficient that prone paddlers can access open ocean swells. And it took a while to get there. I went through a lot of iterations where I really thought, okay, this is going to be it. And I'd go out and try it and just be horribly disappointed and frustrated. And there were a couple of times where I took 2 or 3 months off and just thought it's not going to happen. And then something would come to mind and I'd go try again, and that went on for a while. You might even remember one of my first production prone downwind boards was, I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 years ago, maybe even more.
Mhm.
Um, it was 6.0 or 6.2, and at the time I thought, boy, that's long because we were riding closer to 5. So I figured a foot more and drastically narrower had to be the answer. And I was on the right path, but I hadn't gotten all the way there yet. It took, more evolution and more trial and error. But eventually I figured out that the length needed to be a part of it, along with design components that help the efficiency. But for sure, the length, the width are the main ingredients to making these boards really efficient and allowing us to get up much easier.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of surprises along the way too, like how stable an 18-inch wide all the way down to 16 is what I use now. And figuring out that you don't look towards the board as your stability anymore. You just look at it as your flotation. And the paddle is now the main source of stability. And when you just change that mindset and develop that skill of using your paddle to stabilize yourself, it kind of changes everything, and now makes it more accessible to well, as we saw a few days ago, a lot of people,
Yeah, I
out
mean,
in the
like
lakes.
like you said, you thought the prone foilers would never pick up a paddle, but now everybody's like, I think, I mean, the Maui to Molokai had a prone foiling division, but only one person entered, So
Right.
all the prone surfers are now stand-up paddlers, and they had to figure out how to use a paddle, and yeah, like you said, use the paddle for stability. But I mean, obviously, also a lot of stability comes from the foil as well, right? I mean, you couldn't paddle on one of those boards without a foil underneath it, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, but at that time, we thought, I thought 24, 25 inches was really narrow.
Right,
And it is for a 5-foot board, you know. But
right.
when you increase that length, um, a lot more stability came along with it than I had ever thought there would be. Um, so yeah, a lot of surprises and learning curves, and really a massive education in
Yeah, I mean
adjusting what I thought I knew versus what I actually ended up learning.
yeah. I mean, it's like it sounds like you made it for prone paddling, but then you figured out that you could actually stand up on it as well, right? um,
Yeah, and credit to Jeremy Riggs, because I still didn't believe you could stand up on a 18, 17, 16-inch wide board. And it wasn't until I saw him do it and he made it look easy that I kind of went, well, maybe you can stand up on these things. Um, so yeah, it was a very fun process and learned a tremendous amount along the way. And ultimately, kind of, while I didn't satisfy the original goal, which was making it this prone thing, it did ultimately become accessible with a paddle uh, to everybody. But on the other side of the coin, at that time, the foils were so much bigger and had such a good low end that if we were still using those types of foils, I think a lot more people would be proning. But now that speed and racing has become such a focal point of downwinding, you literally can't ride these super fast, tiny, high aspect foils and think you're going to prone up on them, but you certainly can with a paddle. And so it's almost as if racing or the high aspect wings have sort of killed the momentum that was going for a second with prone downwinding.
yeah, I mean, it's amazing how small the foils are that they're using now in the races. I mean, I guess they're just trying to go for speed, obviously, not so much for easy pop-ups, but
Yep.
when you're starting out, obviously you want to use something that you can easily get up on foil with, so you can actually right get the feel and get going. That's definitely a challenging thing in the beginning.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have any tips for people getting into it? Stand-up foiling, downwind foiling?
Yeah, I would highly recommend that you attend Jeremy Riggs' Flatwater pop-up class,
Hmm.
because if you can even get close to popping up on flat water, you don't have to ultimately be successful, but the skills you learn in that process of trying to attain that goal are the same skills you need to get up when you catch a little bump outside in a downwinding situation. And the more developed those skills are, and the more familiar you are with what needs to happen to generate speed, acceleration, pop up, pumping, all those components that are necessary in flat water pop up are the same ingredients that you need to be successful in getting up out in the open ocean and catching a small bump. So I would start there for anybody that's offering that information. Jeremy's got a bunch of videos if you want to check them out.
Yeah.
But it's when you pull the trigger to catch a bump, it's more work than you think it is. It's not a relaxed sort of endeavor where you kind of mosey your way into a bump. You've got to go from 0 to 100 in basically one stroke if you're going to catch one of those bumps, because they're not very steep. They're moving relatively quickly. And so you've got to get up to speed quite abruptly, which means you've got to put out a lot of effort. And if you do, a lot of times you do catch that bump, and it allows you to get up on foil, and voila, you're on your way.
Yeah. And then you have to start pumping and connecting and keeping on foil. So yeah, I found that in the beginning it was super hard because I was so exhausted from pumping up on foil that then I didn't have the energy to keep going, right? So, but anyway, yeah, I mean it's so cool to see how that sport has been evolving so quickly, and basically it seems like regular stand-up paddle downwind paddling is like almost dead now, or it's like it's become almost irrelevant. Seems like compared to stand-up foiling, downwind foiling. But I saw on Instagram that you recently you're still doing downwinders on a traditional stand-up paddleboard.
No,
No.
not much. I did one last year.
That was a year ago. Okay.
I'm getting my son into one-man paddling.
Okay.
And so as a means to kind of be more equal speed-wise and make it easier to go with him, I jumped back on the stand-up. You're talking old school stand-up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I jumped back on it, and it had been years, and your initial thing after coming off a foil board and that teetering back and forth and going, God, have I ever done this before? But within a few minutes, it kind of comes back and you relax and you find your groove again. But yeah, I still have my old unlimited downwind stand-up boards, and every once in a while, it's fun to jump on one just to remember how lucky we have it with the foils now. How much more fun they are.
Yeah. What about regular stand-up surfing? Do you still surf on a regular stand-up board? Or?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I would say foiling represents probably 60 to 70% of my wave riding, but the other 30 to 40%, that's probably divided up equally between stand-up and longboarding. So I still really enjoy getting on my stand-up and back on my longboards too. When the quality of the surf is better, I usually have at least a stand-up or a longboard on the car as well, and switch over into that mode and go out and get a few waves.
And then when you stand-up surfing, you usually use like kind of more of a longboard type shape, or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then
I've been riding my 11-foot longboard and 11-foot stand-up a lot the last couple of years, and oh my God, just having so much fun. Moving from break to break and maybe covering a mile or two at different peaks, and riding all the way in, and just I love the versatility and how you can kind of wander around and sort of adventure on the longer stand-ups and even longer longboards too.
Very cool. So what about competing? I mean, just a few years ago, you were kind of like competing with the top, like, I remember not too long ago, you were like doing the Maui to Molokai and being like head to head with Connor Baxter, who's probably like was half your age at the time or less than half your age, and now are you still thinking about competing at all, or are you kind of done with that, or what's your deal with that?
I would still very much like to compete, but my schedule has me usually working pretty intensely right for the whole month prior to the races. And I've sort of prioritized working and generating that income to support my family and myself um, over racing.
Right,
I did the races last year, but basically with zero training. I just figured I'd send it.
right,
But this year, it's it was really fun last year to do it, and I had more success than I thought I would. But it was also at the same time really frustrating because I know if I prepared like I normally do, I could probably do better, and that's really frustrating. And so this year I had the same work schedule, which required traveling quite a bit right before the races. I just decided to take the year off and not put any pressure on myself, and just focus on work for the time being, and try and support some of the guys that ride my boards with information and tactics and lines and sort of stuff like that. But
right.
I
Able
do
you're
very much in a perfect world want to race again, but really only if I can put at least the minimum amount of preparation into it.
sure, that's understandable. Yeah, yeah, especially yeah, like you were always at the top level, so it's hard to be coming in like in the middle somewhere, right? I'm sure.
Well, I have a feeling that even if I did prepare how I'd want to, I might still be in the middle of the pack after seeing this racing season and how competitive the top 20, even the top 30 are. While last year I think I was 10th or 11th or something like that in the M2M, I
Yeah.
would imagine a similar showing would only net you maybe 25 to 30
Yeah.
now because there's so many more guys that are so much faster. It really is amazing to see how competitive it's got.
Yeah, and it seems to be a young man's game too, like or like the level of fitness that you need for the pumping all the way through and all that kind of stuff. It's definitely easier for the teenagers. It seems like to do that or the younger.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Whereas in
it's
foil,
almost you can't compete with them because they're using foils that are so small and so fast that if I used one of those by halfway through the race, I'd probably already have a heart attack from trying to keep that up on foil because it requires a lot of work. Like there's
yeah,
big payoff and there's times where you can go really fast, but when you make a mistake or a bad call and you slow down and now you've got to pump for your life to stay up, I can't do it anymore.
right, yeah, 100% agreed. Yeah, I mean, it seems like the wing. That's where wing foiling is. It seems to be a little bit easier for the old guys to compete with the young guys, like um, Alan Cadiz and Winter both did really well. I mean, with the right equipment and the experience and the strategy and all that kind of stuff, and you don't need as the same level of fitness, I think, to be fast on a wing foil board. So that's what I like about that, I guess. That seems like
Yeah, that aspect is such a skill and sort of tactics. Um, take take the lead on that sort of foiling, trimming your wing, lines, utilizing the swells. It takes some of the fitness out of it, which is good for the more mature competitors.
yeah,
But that's a tough pill to swallow too. Having to acknowledge you're now racing age group as opposed to just racing
right.
whoever shows up.
Everyone overall, yeah, for sure. Um, so I always like to start kind of with the background, but I kind of got sidetracked with this conversation. But let's start from the beginning. Like, how did you grow up? I think you grew up in California, and
Yep.
but you're a Hawaiian, and have like a long heritage of watermen. So talk a little bit about your background and growing up and what you did as a kid.
Yeah, so on the Hawaiian side, my grandfather was originally from kind of Hana Kaupo area. My dad grew up in Kaimuki, kind of just in the shadows of Diamond Head, and learned to surf there. And then his family moved to California when he was still in high school, and that's where he met my mom. And I came along a few years later. So I grew up in Southern Cal when I was very young, just your average Southern California middle class neighborhood kid riding his twin Stingray and clay wheels on the first skateboards I got and climbing trees and just having fun. Um, but I ended up going to high school in Mammoth, so I got really into ski racing for a while. And a couple years after, didn't have the success I was hoping for, and took a reprieve to Maui, thinking I'll regroup, figure out which direction my future is going to go. And I had just been getting into windsurfing at that time, and Maui was sort of the mecca of windsurfing.
And
And
what age was that when you went to Maui? Like how old were you?
I was 20 when I moved to Maui.
Okay.
Um, so that was nearly 40 years ago at this point,
Right.
And got really into it and had some success with it, and really didn't put much pressure on myself, and just enjoyed it. I had very low expectations, which I think allowed me the freedom to excel in my learning curve and my competitiveness. So I had good success in windsurfing for, let's say, a decade. And at the end of my windsurfing,
So
tow surfing,
I'm sorry.
longboarding.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
like just going back to like so when you first went to Maui, you didn't really have any water sports experience before that. Like living in California, you were like I guess playing football, skiing, and things like that. But like, what about any? Did you surf or do you have any
Uh,
other?
yeah, I learned to surf when I was pretty young.
Okay.
My dad was a very accomplished surfer for way back in the day. He won the 1962 U.S. surfing championships in Huntington Beach.
Mhm.
So I had that foundation of water sports in the family, that legacy. My grandfather started the first outrigger canoe club in California, early 60s, maybe even the late 50s. So there was quite the heritage of watermen already established in the family.
Mhm.
But I didn't know that much about it. I didn't really aspire to be the next one at a young age until I learned to surf. And after a couple years of surfing, I learned to surf when I was 7, I think it was, in Newport Beach. Um, Got really into the culture and the whole sport, and
Yeah.
then I started, like any young surfer, dreaming of being a pro and riding giant waves in Hawaii and all that, but never really expecting it to manifest or become anything. Just having fun with it when I was young,
Yeah. So
and
then
especially
when
when I
you
moved to the
arrived,
mountains, that dream really kind of got backburnered.
okay. So when you arrived in Maui and then got into windsurfing, what was that like? Like how did you get into it and
Well,
what,
my my parents bought me a windsurfer for graduation from high school. And so I learned up in Mammoth in the summertime. So there was a lake just down the hill, and kind of got into it, when I would have been 15 or 16, something like that. And just kind of flat water cruising, nothing high performance at all, just playing around down at the lake,
Mhm.
sailing Hobies and learning how to windsurf. And then when I got the windsurfer for my graduation, I got a little more into it because I had my own equipment, and I got planing for the first time. And that was like a life altering moment. Planing across the water on a windsurfer just blew my mind.
Yeah.
And that changed the trajectory of my life significantly.
Yeah.
And got very into windsurfing, which is what ultimately led me to Maui. I didn't really have any particularly developed skills. I was below average at best when I first got to Maui, but I could do it. I could water start, I could jibe, but doing it every day with the caliber of riders around me um, enabled me to accelerate my learning curve significantly.
Right. And then you started competing and you got sponsored. Is that like kind of how you supported yourself with sponsorships or like how,
Yep,
and probably
exactly,
drove the old Maui Cruiser and
exactly.
trying to
I
save
mean,
money
back in those days,
travel and
you didn't
windsurfing?
need much. I made a like $1,000 a month, and I was living large. I had enough for gas. I could buy food and pay my rent. And times have changed, obviously, but yeah, life was very simple. I didn't need much, and I could not have dreamed of a more, you know, paradise type existence than the first few years I got here to Maui.
Awesome. Yeah. So, and then talk a little bit about how you got into like the whole, strap surfing, tow and foiling, and all that kind of stuff. Like you were kind of
Well,
one of the pioneers who started doing all that stuff, right?
yeah. So a classic case of hanging out with the wrong people was the first kind of point of embarking on all that stuff. So be careful who you hang out with. I say that lovingly and jokingly, but kind of there's some truth to it. Because we all came from windsurfing, it almost inherently means that you have an open mind. Because at that time, surfing was king, and it still is. But surfers, while they have this reputation of being kind of free and open minded, you don't really get to stray far from the established path, especially in the 80s. And so the fact that we were all windsurfers, you had to have an open mind about taking a step away from surfing and trying these alternative versions of surfing. And so, with that as sort of a starting point, you're open to other versions and toe surfing, strap surfing, all those things were not a far leap for us in a mindset way to go try, you know? Um, and so all the people I was hanging with at that time and windsurfing with had that same mindset. And so we were all very much into experimenting with foot straps on surfboards and then incorporating zodiacs to tow ourselves and then ultimately wave runners and stuff like that. And at the time, while it was very kind of innocent and authentic because we didn't really know what laid ahead, we were just having fun. But when we started experimenting with really large surf, it became very apparent, wow, there's a lot more here than we ever thought. And that's kind of when it started to get more serious because after a few poundings you realize what you're embarking on and the seriousness and how much power you're interacting with, and that survival is now part of the math that you need to do on a daily basis. Because at that point we didn't have flotation. If you wanted to get back to the surface, it was your hands and legs and lungs that were going to get you there.
Right.
No flotation. And fortunately, flotation came along and has probably saved hundreds of lives, but we'll never know because you don't have the statistics of those people that would have died had they not been wearing flotation, right?
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it started out all fun and games, and then it got kind of serious as we really got into the big surf.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, at the time too, like most surfers were like, "Oh, I wouldn't wear flotation because then I can't dive under the waves. You know, when a big wave comes towards you, you don't want to be floating on the surface." But yeah, I guess yeah, when you get held down, you want to be able to get back up, right?
Well, on the waves that we were riding, there basically was no diving under them anymore
Right.
because they penetrate so deep. You just needed to get under the surface so that your head didn't get sheared off as that initial water was coming across the surface. Once you do that, I don't care if you're 5 feet down or 10 feet or maybe even 15 feet, you're still going to get caught up in that turbulence.
Right.
And so you're better off with flotation on that will help get you back up to the surface much quicker. So yeah, fortunately, we did open our minds, get over our egos enough to allow ourselves to wear the flotation, but it didn't. It took a near death experience for me to get over that hurdle.
Hmm.
Actually, Laird started wearing the flotation before I did, and Paul Miller was the first one in our group that was wearing flotation, and then Laird incorporated it. And I used to give him a hard time, like, come on, what are you doing, puss, and all this. And then I had a near death experience, and it was like, oh, okay, I get it now. This
Yeah.
is this is for real. You can die out here. So the next day and for the next several years, I put a lot more emphasis on incorporating flotation, preparing myself, holding my breath, getting stronger, and all those things that you need to survive.
Okay. And then talk a little bit about how, how you got into foiling. Like I know, I guess somehow you got an air chair and you put the foil on the surfboard and some, like I guess bindings and snowboard boots or whatever it is. So talk a little bit about that whole, like how that came about.
Yeah, so I want to say it was mid '90s ish. I don't remember exactly the year, but to my recollection, Brett Lickle got an air chair, um, brought it down to the group, and we all decided to give it a go. And at that point, it was the closest I had ever come to drowning. And we were out in flat water on the Ma'alaya side, and you you're sitting on this thing which feels so foreign right from the start. Then it's this bucking bronco effect where you're up, you're down, you're up, you're down. Next thing you know, you're down underwater. But I was laughing so hard at the experience I was having, and I couldn't stop laughing even when I went underwater and I started to inhale a bunch of water. I'm a foot and a half from the surface, tied into this apparatus that doesn't allow you to swim up very quickly, laughing my head off, almost drowning, and I'm trying to get to the surface, which is only a foot away.
Oh, geez.
Anyway, when I finally broke the surface, I was coughing and choking and still laughing at the same time. It was quite the experience, and a lot of the other guys had a similar experience. We were all laughing at each other. It just looked so goofy. Um, but and that was, I say it looked goofy because we hadn't seen what Mike Murphy and those guys could do on the air chair at that point. When I started to see the videos of them doing these giant airs and flips and twists, it was like, whoa, I had no idea these things could do that. Um, so, being surfers, we were like, okay, sitting down was fun, but we ride stuff standing up. So it was a natural progression to figure out how do we stand on these things and ride them. And it took a few tries, because of the foiling and the leverage it had. Just standing on it didn't seem possible. Then we tried the foot straps, and that wasn't adequate. And finally, it was, I think Laird had snowboard boots and bindings, and so we mounted those on them. And all of a sudden, voila, we had the ankle support we needed to manipulate the foil and feel like we could actually control it. And then, boom, we were off and running. And it only took us a matter of time to bring waves into the equation and discover, ooh, wow,
Yeah.
this is cool. we could
Yeah,
let go of the rope and surf these foils on a wave.
yeah, and so that was like I guess almost 30 years ago, right? So it's kind of crazy how long it took to go from that to actually people like, Kai Lenny surfing, doing a downwind or on a foil. So
Yeah.
yeah, why did it take so long to evolve, do you think? Or I mean, or is it a long time? I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah, no, it wasn't long. I mean, we were foiling a lot at that time, but I understood you needed the jet ski, the boots, the bindings, which weren't really accessible on a commercial level as a package. So
Mm.
you had to put some effort into it to combine all the components and get what you needed. Um, so I understood why it didn't take off, but it was so fun right from the beginning that we weren't into it for commercial reasons. We were into it for fun. And we were having so much fun. We could care less about it if anybody else did it or not. We were doing it, and that's all that mattered at that point. Um, and even early on at that point, the foils were pretty crude because you were always getting towed behind a boat. So efficiency wasn't that valued for the foils that they needed for the air chair. But once we started riding waves and it was just a pure glide, um, I started working on more efficient foils, and so got really into that. But looking back at it now and not really understanding it at the time, we were very restricted on what we could create because all we had access to was slalom foil panels of fiberglass. So that meant you could only make the foils so thick. Um, and my understanding of how foils work was pretty crude at that time, but they were much more efficient than what was available. It allowed us to start chasing bigger waves, making smaller foils and things that were custom. And so I felt like we came a decent way, but we obviously didn't get all the way. Um, it's funny, right when I sort of stopped tow foiling, I was just starting to experiment with foils that were much higher aspect and more like a glider plane to start trying to downwind.
Mm.
Um, but stand up paddling at that time was taking off. And so I kind of got off the foil train and onto the SUP train and went all in on that and sort of dropped the ball for a while. Um, and then, right before Kai's video, which changed everything, you were seeing these stand-up paddle foil wave riders. I think I saw one from France. A California guy was doing one, and it actually inspired me to even try and make a stand-up foil board incorporating all our old tow stuff. And I went out and tried it in small waves, and it was a huge failure. So I kind of gave up on the concept, and that was probably only 6 months to a year before Kai's video came out and what he had developed with Alex Segura.
Mhm.
And when I saw that, it was like just like everybody else. It was like, wow, that's wow. I want to try that.
And it was really kind of the kiters that really kind of pushed foiling ahead for a while. I mean, basically, they kind of took up foiling. But yeah, I guess at the time, all the foils were made for high speeds and low drag, and like you said, very thin. And then yeah, I guess what revolutionized it kind of was making foils for slower speeds that could fly at thicker foils. I guess like a bigger foil that could fly at lower speeds. So that's yeah, but it's just interesting that it took so long to get to that point, I guess. But like you said, maybe it could have happened earlier if you hadn't gotten into stand-up paddling. But let's talk about that, the stand-up paddling. And you and Laird Hamilton are kind of credited for bringing it to the masses. So maybe talk about how you guys got into stand-up paddling and stand-up surfing.
Well, again, I think that was late 90s, maybe early 2000s. I can't remember for sure. But we were both sponsored by Oxbow. We were doing an Oxbow shoot. We were at Ma'alai on a very small wave day. And at that time, we both rode 12-foot longboards consistently in the summertime, because we both kind of felt like they were a good training device for big wave surfing in tiny waves, because
Mm.
you had to plan your line out so far ahead to fit a 12-foot board in a waist high wave. And so there was, or at least we created this similarity between the two.
Mhm.
Um, so the boards were big enough that you could stand on them after you kicked out of a wave, and the winds, as everybody knows, at Maalaea are offshore, and so we'd blow back out to the peak and then lay down and catch a wave again. And after a couple of times, rather than just standing there and letting the wind blow us out, I was like, well, I had just done a canoe run on the North Shore, and I had a couple canoe blades with me, so I was like, hey, I'll be right back, and I went and grabbed the canoe paddles, and I gave one to Laird, and we were bent way over to reach the water, but we could paddle back out and be more active to get ourselves back out to the lineup. And we were having fun. We were laughing, and it was a cool experience, but I didn't really take it that seriously. I just thought it was something kind of fun.
Yeah.
Laird took it very seriously, and he went out and had some taller paddles made for us the next day from Malama, a local paddle builder here on Maui.
Right.
And all of a sudden we could stand up as we were going back out rather than hunched way over. It was like, well, that's a lot more functional. And while I'd like to make it very clear, we neither of us has ever claimed to invent stand up. The Waikiki guys were doing it way before us. The Makaha guys were doing it before us. Um, I just think that we had the infrastructure around us to share it with a lot more people.
Yeah.
Um, and it sort of caught fire and spread quite a bit. Laird was going back to California in the summer times and sharing it with all those guys, and they enjoyed it. And I was doing it with all our friends here on Maui, and they sort of got into it. And almost immediately in the summertime, it's downwind season, right? So we started doing downwinders on these big longboards, and was going almost as fast as the prone guys that had really efficient boards.
Mhm.
And so I was like, oh, okay, look, maybe we need to start developing boards for downwinding and stand up. And so, yeah, just like everything, always trying to develop, progress, develop, and evolve.
Yeah, yeah, and it's amazing how quickly that became a big sport, like and kind of drawing people from a lot of other disciplines, like a lot of windsurfers got into stand-up paddling when there's no wind and so on. So now I lost my train of thought, but yeah, it's just super cool how you were kind of early on in all the development. So now for stand-up paddling, I mean, I guess you make your own Kalama performance boards, but you also shape boards for uh, what's that brand? Sorry, um,
Oh, imagine.
Imagine. Yeah, so you're the shaper for Imagine, right?
Yeah. So
How does that
I've been
work?
associated with Imagine stand up for quite some time now. And while stand up as a sport has lost a lot of momentum, um, I kind of feel like it's coming back in a sense, but in a sort of healthier version where it's more about utilizing the versatility of a bigger board and not trying to be a big short board anymore. It's you can cruise from peak to peak. It's about the exercise, the downwind. Now, when I say it's coming back a little bit, I mean a little bit. Foiling obviously has all the momentum right now, but it almost seemed like stand up was in this fairly steep decline. Um, and it's kind of leveled off and maybe creeping back up a little bit, which I'm quite excited about because I still really enjoy it and think it's an awesome sport and has so much to offer anyone of all different ability levels.
I'm
Just
totally seeing the same thing. It's not as much of a high performance sport, but there's a big base of stand-up paddlers that just enjoy cruising or going out there and paddling. I mean, it's crazy how many people have inflatable boards, like it's
Yep.
I mean worldwide it's become a huge sport, but yeah, I think kind of the performance end of it is just kind of like, especially in Hawaii, it's almost like nobody's participating anymore, right? So everyone's gotten into foiling or whatever. So, but there's still a big, a lot of millions of people in the world doing it and wanting more information, wanting equipment, and so on. So yeah, it seems to still be a healthy sport for sure. Yeah,
I totally agree. I think it's adopted more of this longboard mindset, where it's about just the simplicity of it, riding a wave, sliding across the water, the enjoyment of the act in a more large sense, and not specific maneuvers and how vertical you get or throwing your fins out, which is fine too.
mm,
But that simplicity and pureness of just riding a wave or being able to cruise to the next peak where nobody is, um, there's a there's a real simplistic joy that comes along with that, and ultimately you come in, I think, a better person because you're happier. you know
yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
And it's also much more accessible for the average person. Foiling, it just takes a lot of effort and skill and equipment to get good at it. Versus stand-up paddling, it's like almost anybody can try it and get into it and then have fun right away, right? So
You know what?
definitely,
That aspect that you mentioned right there is really an interesting aspect of foiling. It is so difficult that I really had trouble envisioning this becoming a big sport like it has.
mm,
Kind of like when kiting first started, it was so damn dangerous. I thought there's no way this sport is ever going to become anything because it's too dangerous. And I had the same sort of vision of what foiling might be like. It's so difficult, and there's this danger aspect. I don't see it getting that large. But like kiting, the technique develops, the equipment develops, and I actually think that difficulty and that challenge is what is so attractive about it.
yeah,
You
100%.
have to earn it. And when you struggle as long as you do, like everyone does, almost everyone, some of the kids don't struggle, but for the average person, there is a struggle and you have to work and earn it. And when you do get that payoff from that glide, it is such a wonderful sensation and it's so gratifying. You're like, this sport is really cool. And I think that's what's attracted everyone to it.
Yeah, for sure. If it's something's hard to do, it's much more rewarding when you're actually successful at it, right? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's definitely an aspect of it. Interesting. Yeah, 100%. So, you wearing that Namotu shirt, like talk a little bit about your Kalama camps and what happens in those camps. I mean, I've seen pictures and videos and it always looks amazing. So, but like what is that all about?
That the tagline for it is sharing the waterman's lifestyle. And that really is sort of the theme. And the motu is so epitomizes that mindset and that lifestyle where you're completely immersed in a water lifestyle. You're on a 5-acre island, surrounded by water, surrounded by some of the best surf breaks in the world, and there's all different level waves you can ride, and some of them are perfect for stand up and longboarding, for foiling too. When the wind comes up, winging, kiting, it's just kind of a water sports mecca. And so, while sort of the basis of the camp and the foundation was about stand up and longboarding, we can accommodate and encourage you to try all these other water sports, foiling, winging, kiting to some degree. It's not a focal point for us, but we have guys that can teach kiting, snorkeling, just cruising flat water, whatever it is. We've got a 4-man surf canoe down there that Leon puts a sail on and can go canoe sailing or wave riding on the canoe. And so just to share what that lifestyle is like and the enjoyment it can bring, and kind of help, keep all your priorities in order, and your philosophy healthy, in a very general life sense, while at the same time laughing, smiling, learning, um, everything that the ocean has to offer.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. So, how many people are in the camps usually, and how long is it for?
So it runs for a week from Sunday to Sunday. They happen in the first and third week of November. I've got Tom Carroll's one of my coaches and a
Wow.
dear friend. He is such a pleasure to spend time with.
Mm.
Whether there were campers there or not, I enjoy his company as much as any of the campers do. I've got Colin McPhillips, 3 time longboard champion from California. He's a pleasure to surf with, and I love being in the water with him because we have a similar philosophy about how to ride waves. And so every time I can, I want to be in the water with him because I'll watch him ride a wave, and it'll inspire me to try and, okay, well, if you can do that, watch this. We try and one up each other in a really fun way. So it's so fun. And then to give that kind of knowledge and experience and information, and share that with people and help them grow and evolve in their surfing evolutions, is really fun. I've got Rory from Asa from Australia, both from Australia. We bring Pip in as our celebrity cook, and so the food is
Wow.
amazing. And just the Fijians themselves are really what, for me, it's all about. I've traveled so many places in the world, and I've never come across a culture where they don't have much, but they are the happiest group of people I've ever spent time with. And they give each other shit just like good friends do, and they laugh, and they take enjoyment from the simple things in life, and they share that with everyone that comes there. And it's just such a wonderful experience to be around that type of energy and love of life, I guess.
Awesome. So that happens every November, 2 weeks in November.
Yep, yep.
That's
And
awesome.
we typically don't have a lot of openings, but if you're slightly interested, reach out to us through Kalama Camp with a K.com, and get yourself on the list. And when an opening becomes available, we'll reach out to you and see if you can attend.
Awesome. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about wing foiling. This is supposed to be a show about wing foiling, but I know you make wing foil boards, and you were really into windsurfing. So I'm actually surprised that you're not more into wing foiling. So have you done it a bunch, or like how come you're not like out there doing flips and stuff like that?
Well, let's start with the easy one first. Why am I not doing flips in that? Because I can't. And if I tried, I'd hurt myself.
Right. Same.
I'm
Same.
not 20 anymore. And while I can do a lot of stuff, that's not one of them. Um, I did get into the winging initially when it was very young.
Mhm.
And I figured it out, and I can do jives, and I can cruise back and forth. But quite honestly, what dawned on me was, hey, I'm mowing the lawn again, meaning I'm going back and forth, which at the end of windsurfing was the same sensation I had going back and forth. Now, when you throw a wave into the mix, that's a whole different thing. I quite enjoy that. And on rare occasions, will still go do it. But the flat water cruising back and forth has never really been um, where I draw a lot of enjoyment. And so I I didn't get hooked. I can do it. I think it's a absolute fantastic entry point for most people to get into foiling. It gives you an opportunity to spend so much time on foil and figure out all the little nuances in trimming and the controls and the board skills that you need. And if you stay there, fine. It's an epic version of foiling.
Mm.
But I think for a lot of people, it's a gateway to go to downwinding, to wave riding, whatever it might be. But it's fine all within itself. And I just put my focus on the downwinding, the wave riding, and because of how much I work these days, I do very much have a limited amount of time to dedicate to foiling or stand up or whatever it is in the water. So I've got to be selective on what versions I do or the limited time I have to do it. So downwinding and wave riding usually take priority. But when I go to Japan, I usually jump on a wing again and cruise around because that's what's available. And like I say, I think it's a great sport. I have fun when I do it, but it's not a huge focal point for me in my own personal utilization. But in terms of providing boards for it, I think a lot of what has made the Barracuda so successful, the efficiency in making it easier to get up on foil, also expands how much you can go winging. Because if you only need, say, 5 or 6, 7 knots, most places throughout the country and the world, for that matter, have that kind of wind. And so with the efficiency of these boards and how efficient the foils are and the selection you have to pick from now, that means you can go out and have a ball in hardly any wind at all.
Yeah, it's
So
interesting how many people have picked up those boards for light wind winging too, right? So
yeah,
interesting. So yeah,
it's lowered the entry level to go out and do it and have a ball doing it.
for sure. So yeah, so I guess for you, when it's windy, you go downwind foiling, and then when the wind's light, you go stand up foiling, I guess mostly, and then I guess you throw in some stand up surfing and other sports, like what, like I guess, and mostly working. You say these days, right? You say.
Yeah,
So,
I'm that's a good summation of what I'm doing on the water.
so
But
what's your typical day like? Like, what time do you get up, and then do you have some kind of morning routine? Do you exercise, and then talk about your average work day, or what do you do during a day?
so I usually get up between 4 and 5. Some mornings, but not every morning. I'll go through a little stretching and kind of. I hate to call what I do yoga. It's an insult to yoga, but I do try and dabble with the breathing, the stretching, and the calmness that it can bring. I don't do it enough, but I do it. Usually have a little coffee and toast, and then out into the workshop, which I have here at my house, and slinging resin, shaping boards, prepping boards that need to get shipped, boxing them. I've moved up to head box boy at the company and delivery person, so I'm really making headway in the company.
So it sounds
Um,
like you're a little bit like Jimmy Lewis. He does basically everything from start to finish on his boards, right? Is that kind of how you, or do you have anybody helping you at all?
well, on the custom orders, I do everything up to painting. And on my boards, that's fairly early on in the process because we hand laminate. It's more old school. But there's a lot of carbon. There's a lot of high density foam incorporated in the areas that need that type of reinforcement. But like I say, I get the boards painted and then I hand them off to Dave Peterson, who builds them out for me from there on the
Okay.
custom orders. On all the prototypes and my own boards, I do everything myself. But speaking of Jimmy Lewis, very much like him, and I got to say thank you to Jimmy. He's been so supportive in my whole evolution of becoming a shaper, from giving me boxes to ship stand-up boards before foiling ever came along, um, supporting my dad with surfboards. Yeah, I got a lot of love for Jimmy, and I really appreciate the support he's offered me along the way. So, yeah, I really appreciate it. it's funny when before I learned to shape myself, I'd look at Jimmy boards and I'd go, oh, I do this different and I do that different. But always knowing that his boards were really well made and really clean. After I learned how to shape and I actually knew what I was looking at, I had so much more appreciation for how clean everything he did. All the lines in his board are so clean. Boy, I have a much deeper appreciation. Now I still have my own opinions on how a board should be, and they don't all align with anybody, which is a good thing. But yeah, a lot of admiration and respect for Jimmy.
Yeah, I mean, he's amazing too about how he basically keeps no secrets. He just shares all his knowledge and happy to share it with everybody. Like he
Yep.
doesn't hold back, which is pretty rare these days, it seems like. And then I guess you also make your production boards in the same factory as Jimmy, right? And
Yes.
I know he goes over there. He goes to Vietnam and hand shapes the boards and the plugs and
Yes.
stuff like that. Do you do that too, or do you have
Same thing.
computer shaping? You go over there and shape them by hand?
Yep. Obviously, through COVID, we had to change the process a little bit,
Uh-huh.
but prior to, yeah, very much the same thing. In fact, most of the time I had to check and make sure Jimmy wasn't going to be there so that I could go and do the same thing, and have the attention and the infrastructure and support that I would need to create what I wanted to create over there. But yeah, the kinetic factory is really top notch and super helpful in helping you create the designs and manufacture, and their quality is just unmatched.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. The how light and strong the boards are. It's pretty amazing. So really happy with our boards too that we started using them kind of recently and loving the whole process. They're great. Yeah. So um, but yeah, most of my shaping is basically computer shaping. I don't do a lot of hand shaping, but I have a lot of respect for that because it's definitely a different animal to cut out the blank and do all that.
Yeah, I do both technologies, and
Yeah.
usually I start out with full hand shape of a concept, when I have an idea, or with my long boards or my stand up boards. See if I can get it right from my idea into something tangible. And then if I do like it and it works well after I've tested it, then I might try and go through the process of creating a digital file so that I can replicate it.
Well, and you were one of the first to actually make boards specifically for foiling, kind of thinking of instead of just using a surfboard shape and putting a foil on it, you started
Mhm.
making boards that are kind of designed with foiling in mind and making them ideal for foiling. So talk a little bit about that, like where and how it evolved and like what your thoughts are now. Like has anything changed on how you think of a foil board? I mean, other than narrow and long for the stand up foiling, just like
You know,
what's your philosophy?
early on in the process, like most shapers that got into making foil boards, I was just making a modified surfboard for foiling. And it wasn't until I kind of went through a process in my own development, um, where I had to learn to let go of fear and judgment of other shapers, people in general, um, and that whole the fear of being judged. And it was a process, and I put a lot of conscious effort into it to get myself over that hump. And when I did that, that's kind of when I start thinking outside the box, and when I really started making foil boards as opposed to modified surfboards. And that was the first big breakthrough for me when I went to that basically surfable shoebox. Um,
Yeah.
Ultimately, perhaps one of the ugliest things ever created to ride a wave, but for foiling, it was amazing. And then the beauty came from how well it worked. And usually when you find things that work well, they become good looking to you. While it initially, prior to having any experience with them, your eye just sees something different, and usually different is interpreted as ugly. And I went through the same process as everybody else, but I wasn't afraid of being judged anymore, and that's what allowed me to create those early boards, and discover and learn a lot about what was going on. And so from that steep learning curve, and not letting my ego get in the way of that process, it allowed me to kind of go through the process of learning and developing and ultimately getting to the Barracuda, a lot quicker than I might have had I stuck with making versions of surfboards. And so it was really an interesting process for me and helped me grow as a shaper significantly. But like most people, I was very afraid, especially not being an established shaper, of what, my mentors would think. Jerry Lopez, Jeff Timponi, um, Jimmy Lewis, guys like that. I was sort of terrified early on, but once I got over that fear and went, screw it, I don't care what they think. I'm going to make what I want to make, and it might work and might not, but let's find out.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and obviously, very successful with your designs. I mean, it seems like everybody's always copying what you're doing. So,
I noticed that.
yeah, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like that's um, it's a cool thing that everyone's copying you, or are you kind of like, hey, that was my idea. How come you're using this? Like, how do you
You
feel?
know, I don't think it's cool, but I would much rather have them copy me than me copy them.
Mhm.
And sort of like shaping and fear, it was another process I had to go through and learn and find some peace within it and understand that ultimately that's a good thing. I wouldn't want it any other way because that would mean I'd be copying somebody else. Um, and hey, look, it's not a new phenomenon. And let's face it, I copied the guys that created stand-up boards and long boards before me. We're all copying somebody ahead of us,
Mhm.
right? I just happen to be that guy in the foil genre that's a little bit out ahead of most other people when it comes to new concepts because the sport's so new. I don't claim to be smarter, more talented, or anything of that nature than any other shaper out there. I just was in the right place at the right time and managed to get the right mindset to allow myself to learn a lot quickly and experiment with designs that had never existed.
Yeah.
Um, and so a lot of it was just luck, but it's still, as a competitor, as someone competing within this industry, you like to create an advantage for yourself in this competition, right?
Sure.
And to see someone take that advantage that I created and utilize it to their advantage took a second to learn how to be okay with that. But I am now, and I don't want to be an angry person because if I didn't get over it, I would be angry, and that's not who I want to be, and that's not how I want to live. And so I accept it. It's part of the process. There's been many guys that have been copied so much more than me in so many different industries. And, I listened to one of the really big music producers. His name's slipping my mind right now. It'll come to me. Anyway, one of his messages as the creative person was you can't focus on what other people are doing. You have to focus on what you're doing and stay pure in that and let your creativity be untethered or undiluted by distractions of other people. Just stay focused on what you do, and that's what's going to allow you to be your best version of yourself. And it made a lot of sense to me. And so I've really tried to adopt that philosophy full on and just not worry about what anybody's doing. They're
Yeah.
having fun. They're
And
doing what they do.
and it's
That's
not really
okay.
like you can do anything about it. Like shaping is one of those things. Like, I think with music you can get a copyright, with like inventions you can get a patent or whatever, but with a shape it's so hard, like, because even just changing it slightly, then it's not the same anymore. It's like there's no way to protect your intellectual property really. So I guess the best thing is just to always innovate and have the next generation when everyone else is copying your last generation, right? So yeah.
Exactly. It's I sort of compare it to I used to when we'd ride Piahi, a lot of people would want to come and ride Piahi, and not everybody was necessarily qualified, but I understood the drive and the attraction of wanting to do it. It's so amazing to ride one of those waves that why wouldn't anybody want to do it? And if you're a shaper or a designer or a creator, you want to create. And if you draw inspiration from people that have come before, that's the normal process. That's what everyone does, right? And you look at someone like Simon Anderson, who created thruster. Within a few weeks, everyone had a version of a thruster, and he didn't protect it, and so he's never really made any money off of it. Um, but that's how it is.
Right.
And you just keep designing, you keep moving forward, and learn how to not be angry, because would you rather have not created the thruster? That was a huge development in surf design, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
And everyone knows it, or at least that's the information I know. And that's a great problem. You're
Yeah.
very lucky if you have an experience like that.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
you're definitely you'll be always be known as the pioneer of a lot of the foil shapes, I'm sure, So yeah, sure people will remember that. So and you've, like, just along the way you've always been kind of on the forefront, with stand-up paddling, foiling, yeah, new sports. So I'm just curious, like, what do you see? Do you see anything coming, or what's next? What's going to be the next big thing that you think, or is there another thing coming after foiling, or developing, or like, do you have any insights into anything like that, like what's coming in the future?
well, the answer to your basic question of what's coming next, the answer is yes. There is something coming. If I knew exactly what it was, um, then maybe I could actually make some money at this. But I don't. I have no clue.
Right.
Um, I think as long as I just keep an open mind and keep experimenting and paying attention to all the little details, the failures, probably more the failures than the success, because that's where you ultimately learn more, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Um, I leave myself open to the potential of creating something that's new. There's no guarantee. It might be somebody else, and now the tables are turned, and I'm playing catch up to follow somebody else. That's very much a possibility. Um, so I don't know. We'll see. But I've got ideas just like everybody else does. You experiment, you try them. Usually there's some failure involved along the way, and how you respond to that failure is what ultimately might make you successful. Whether it be a small thing or something significant, you never know. But just going through that process, I get a lot of joy from, whether there is a big payoff or not. It's fun to do it.
Yeah. And then just being in Maui too, having that environment and all the people like that are, innovators and open to new ideas and trying things. It's just like such a hotbed for innovation too, for for water sports anyway, water and wind sports. So and yeah, you're definitely part of it. So um,
I I wouldn't doubt if something really cool comes out of Maui. There's a lot of really smart people here that
right.
really love what they do in the water, and so I'm sure, just like me, their brains always ticking on what I can tweak, what I can do next, what if I did this, what if I did that, and that's fun, no matter who you are.
Awesome. So I'm doing the Molokai race in a few days. The Maui to Molokai stand up paddle race on a 14-foot stock board. So you've done it many times. Do you have any pointers or strategies, any coaching tips you can give for that race?
Um, yeah, without taking too much time or getting too in the weeds. Um, I like one of the biggest struggles in that race is maintaining a good attitude. Because if you can maintain that, you give yourself the best chance of success or reaching whatever your potential is, right? That race more than anyone else, and especially in the paddling aspects or genres, be it stand up, canoe, prone paddleboarding, you are going to go through highs and lows. And if you don't get too happy during the highs, or especially more so, too low during the lows, and you just keep an even keel and just keep grinding, keep breathing, keep hydrated, even when you don't need to. If you hydrate when you need to, it's already too late. So figure out a good hydration calorie intake program before you even get to the starting line. And mine was usually like every 10 to 15 minutes, just take a little hit to try and fend off actually getting thirsty. And so your body has a chance to work at a more efficient level. Your muscles have a chance to work at a more efficient level. Breathing can help keep your mind calm, but it also feeds your muscles with oxygen, which is what you can do in the moment to give yourself more energy and more efficiency in the requirements that your muscles need to expend all that energy. So I just like to tell people, breathe, stay calm, especially when things seem to be going wrong, because it will turn. The rest of your race won't be horrible. It might be horrible for a few minutes, but it will change. And you'll get a couple of bumps and you'll be like, hey, I'm kind of on a roll here. I might do pretty damn good. And as soon as you start believing that, here comes another valley to even it all out. So you're constantly going through these mental peaks and valleys. Try and stay as even and calm as you can, because it just makes it easier to get out of those valleys and make them last as short as possible. Hydration, breathing, all those things will help you reach your potential. And then in terms of strategy in a very general sense, my approach was always keep the course as short as possible. It's already long enough. Don't make it any longer. Meaning, don't go 2 miles north so that you can have a more direct downwind and hopefully accelerate in the last few miles, right? While some people buy into that, and there's some legitimate reasoning to it, just for me personally, the course is long enough. I always like to keep it as short as possible. So, in broad strokes, that's, I guess, would be my advice.
That's excellent advice. Thank you. Appreciate that. For breathing, I tried to time my breathing with my strokes, kind of trying to inhale on the recovery and so on. Can you give a little
Yep.
bit of pointers, like how do you breathe? Do you use mouth breathing, nose breathing? What's your breathing rhythm and so on? Like, yeah, I'm just curious on that.
Yes. Exactly what you just said. Breathe with your stroke because that will create rhythm. If and I know in a downwind situation, it's so unrhythmical because you're constantly spiking or declining in terms of effort output. But there's an internal timing and rhythm that you can create even with that variability. And breathing is the key to finding that. So breathing with your stroke, ideally your heart rate's low enough that you can breathe through your nose and utilize that technique. But there's times where you might spike a bit. You just chased a big one, but it paid off. But now cardiovascularly, you're deprived, so you need to get as much oxygen in as you can. And so, I would go to mouth breathing to try and accommodate a quicker turnover in oxygen flow. But as soon as I could, get back to that calm nose breathing, or as much as I could. But yeah, very much breathing to your stroke. When you're on a glide, and it's a good one, and it doesn't have to be a fast one. But if you're gliding faster than you can paddle, and you're not going to be able to get over the next bump, relax. Take a couple of deep breaths. Big nose breathe. Start low, fill up your lungs, exhale all that tension, let it go. And if you can get 2 or 3 of those in, and maybe pull your shoulders back and a couple of shoulder rolls where you really open up your chest, oh boy, that can really help reset you to go into attack mode or efficiency mode, kind of on the spot real quick.
Yeah. Oh, that's great advice. Yeah, just I mean, it's such a start and stop too. When you're catching bumps, like sometimes you have to put out a lot of energy, and then you do need to have that time to recover and rest a little bit in between, right? To have the energy for the next time. So what about nutrition? Like, what do you use how do you take in your calories? Do you try to mix it in with your hydration, or do you eat, or what do you use or what did you use in the
I
past?
just had those little gel packs, and
Hmm.
as my career went along, I utilized them less and less.
Hmm.
It was kind of strange. Early on, I'd use the gels. I had all the fancy mixes for my drinks. Um, and I just got more simple and more simple as time went on. And at the last few races, including the one I won in 11 or 12 or whatever it was, um, I would always have a set of bottles that contain 50-50 Gatorade and water, and a set of bottles that contain just water. And I never knew exactly which one I would want. I'd carry one of both with me, and I would sort of let what my body was telling me dictate if I needed a bit of sugar in my drink or pure water was it. And it was very seldom was the same from race to race.
Hmm.
But there were times where all I wanted was water. I didn't want that sugar. I didn't want anything in it. And just pure water was boom, perfect. And it would keep me good. And then there were other times where it was like, no, I need that little hit of sugar, or the straight Gatorade was too sugary. It would do more harm than good. But I
Hmm.
found that 50-50 Gatorade water mix was adequate for me when I felt like I needed it. So I would let the moment sort of dictate what I wanted, um, and just go with what my body was telling me.
Awesome. Oh, those are good tips. Really appreciate that. So, okay, I think you were very generous with your time. Do you have any last words you want to share with the foiling community? Like any tips or suggestions or anything you want to
Yeah,
say?
I want to share a quick experience of where I'm currently at with my foiling.
Okay.
With the advent of high aspect foils, they're so much faster, they're so much more efficient. They do so many things better, but they're not as much fun in my experience. I love the surfing aspect of downwinding and going with the flow and carving turns and literally finding the rhythm of the ocean, and kind of turning your mind off and finding that true flow where it becomes natural. And I'm having a real tough time with the high aspects learning how to turn them properly. Um, they just, like I say, there's so many things they do well, but turning and smoothness doesn't seem to be one of them. And so I'm in this place right now trying to figure out, do I want to accept a slower foil that surfs and allows me to have more fun and a bigger smile and find that flow where I can get out of my own way and sort of almost reach a state of zen and just bliss? Or do I want to be more consciously active and involved and go much faster, um, and push my times and run with people that are faster, but not enjoy it as much? And I've heard a few other people say they're having the same experience, which makes me feel better because it's really, I'm last year everything seemed so perfect in terms of equipment, and now all these advancements have come along, and I know they're better on paper. 100% undeniably the foils are insane, but they're not equating to more fun. At least that's my experience. And so I'm in this really strange place right now, which I actually like. I like being uncomfortable and having to figure something out, because that's part of where I get a lot of joy from, is decoding things and figuring out what my priorities are and what I want out of this and where I get my enjoyment. And so it's a fun process to go through on a very different level. It's not a design thing for me. It's just purely personal and sort of skill and philosophy and all these components that equate to, am I having fun or not? And
I
so it's,
yeah, I love
I don't
that.
know. Do you
Yeah,
have a similar experience, or have you heard anybody else going through that?
I mean, I totally go through that. You know, like when you're training for racing, it's all about speed, right? And especially when you're wing foiling, you're like basically trying to pass over the bumps. You're trying to go faster than the bumps if you can, right? So, but you know, where's it's not as much fun as being on a bump and riding a bump and just surfing it and having no pressure in your wing or whatever, you know. So to me, it's like, yeah, you know, is it, am I doing this to have fun or am I doing it to go as fast as I possibly can? You know, so yeah, what like so racing I think does take away some of that the fun of it, right? So and is you know, but basically isn't that why we're doing it? It's you know, it's supposed to be fun, right? That's the whole point of it. So
I
um
agree.
yeah.
And there's times where, I'll time myself. I time myself one every 20 runs, maybe. I just don't like the pressure of the watch. But when I try a new foil that I know is faster and it's really good conditions, and it's like, all right, let's see if I can get a personal best today. So I'll start the watch, I'll do the run, pumping, grinding. Yes, I feel fast. I get to the end, I push my watch, and maybe it's 30 seconds slower, maybe it's 10 seconds faster. And I have to wait to see what the numbers say to determine if I had fun or not.
Yeah, 100%. I hear you on that. And a lot of times it's just the conditions too, right? Like if you had a fast run, it might be just that the tide was in the, or you know, the currents were going in your favor or whatever. But yeah, and I think competing is fun, obviously, and challenging yourself and beating your own time is it's fun, you know, and it's exciting. But yeah, it not necessarily doesn't maximize the fun of the moment and like you said, the flow being, you know, just enjoying the you know the whole nature experience and like being immersed in everything and
Yep.
kind of you know being mindless or losing your you know, not thinking about anything, like that empty mind feeling where you're just in the moment, that
You're in the
Zen
moment.
moment, that's what it's all about really. And sometimes, yeah, if you're too into competing and racing, it's hard to find that place, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share that with people, and maybe it's my age. I'm a lot further along in the whole process. Um, Younger guys where you're trying to prove something and make a mark and build a reputation. I went through all that. I understand it. and it's justifiable, and um, no problem with it. But yeah, I'm in a different stage now.
Yeah, and it sounds like you used to have, basically you used to have all the time in the world to train and get in the water and have fun, and you were sponsored and so on. Now you're kind of on the other side of the coin where you're creating the gear for other people to have fun on, basically. But like, how do you manage your time, and do you do you make time still to have fun, and or is it just like when you get in the water, are you just testing the equipment, or do you feel like you still have time to actually really enjoy the water sports?
Well, so I did. Well, I took yesterday off, but the day before I did a run. And to give you an idea of where my current situation is, that was my second run in 6 weeks.
Oh wow.
Just because I've been traveling and busy, and when I got back, trying to catch up with everything. And so, like everybody else in reality, um, you have responsibilities, you have jobs, you need things that you have to do. Um, so that you have time down the road to do runs, maybe 5 days out of a week. And I kind of see that period coming up before too long. Um, at least I hope it does, because, another aspect of this is, and being in the stage I'm in, is the mental health aspect. And just a few years ago, maybe before COVID, mental, whatever, I don't know what you're talking about. But now it's very much a real thing. And if I'm going to go through those periods where I go twice in 6 weeks, now I need to work on my mental aspect, keeping myself motivated and positive. And the best way to do that is to get in the water, right? And so sometimes you just have to carve out that time and prioritize it for mental health reasons, never mind the physical aspect or the fun of it. Just to keep yourself right, you better go do a run. So there are times where I'll sacrifice getting boards done. So if you got a board coming from me and it's taking a little longer, I might be focused more on my mental health that week than getting your board done. Um, but yeah, it's a real thing now.
Yeah.
And when I get very busy, it's all this whole lifestyle. If I was making millions of dollars and there was more pressure or whatever it was, maybe I'd have to set down the water sports activity. But I do all of this to live this lifestyle, and that lifestyle is heavily dependent upon getting in the water. So that's what makes it all worthwhile. So I highly recommend, when it's possible, because it's not always possible, but when you can, if you sacrifice just a little bit, go get that day or that hour or even half hour sometimes is enough. And it's like, "Oh, okay, the world's okay. It's not going to end. I'll make it, just because you got in the water. Where if you don't, you keep piling on. It's like, I got to do this and I got to do that. Oh my God, blah, 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 and it's a downward spiral. But if you can get in the water and just get a session, it's like, yeah, everything will be okay.
Yeah, 100%. And it's, I think, important to sometimes remind ourselves why we're in this business too, right? Like, like the reason we got into the business because we love it, and like, but if all you're doing is working, then and you're not enjoying it, like, what's the whole point? Right? Yeah.
Yeah. If you're just going to work, there's a lot of things you can do that will probably make you more money than at least, you know, the board business at my level.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much, Dave. And then I guess now, Austin, your son is kind of carrying on the torch, the next generation of watermen. Um, do you spend a lot of time doing stuff together, or is he just doing his own thing?
He's kind of doing his own thing, really. And that's okay, because I want him to come out from underneath my shadow. And I think he's doing that. He's doing a good job of that. Every big wave situation, the foiling, that's not a derivative of me. That's him
Hmm.
chasing it himself, having the desire in his own right, um, which I think will make him feel better about it, and ultimately probably achieve more success because it's coming from within him and his enjoyment of it. Um, so I've sort of stood down a little bit and not been there as much as you might think I am. But I love seeing it, and I'm so proud of him and my all my kids. My daughter has become a local entertainer and really carved out a nice little niche for herself. Um, and she's killing it in the local entertainment scene as a singer and musician. Um, I've got two younger sons that are heavily involved in sports and school and surfing and stand up and learning to foil and all the other things that I can share with them. So I'm very fortunate in that sense.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dave. I wish you continued success, and yeah, don't work too much and enjoy the ocean.
Thanks, Robert. Great talking with you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching this Blue Planet show with Dave Kalama. Some of the tips he gave me were really helpful. This is actually now a week later after the Molokai to Oahu race, so I can say his tips really helped me when I was struggling in the channel last Sunday. About 10 miles off Oahu. I remember some of his words. The deep breathing, I just made sure I got a lot of good deep breaths, and just that kept me going. The nutrition tips, drinking, eating, and then also just relaxing and bringing back my shoulders, getting a little bit of rest in between. All those things really helped me out, and I'm happy to report that I won the first place overall in the men's stock division. So I'm super stoked about that. I've never won a division overall in the Molokai race, and it's my 13th channel crossing. So after 13 times, I finally won. There wasn't a lot of pros in the race, so it wasn't super competitive, but I finished third stand-up paddleboard overall and first place in the men's stock division, which was my best result ever in the overall standings. Not my best time, but it was a super tough channel. It was really rough off at the end off Port Lock. So it was a struggle, it was hard work, but I made it, and I have to say thanks, Dave, for your great tips. So I hope you enjoyed this show. Please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to the Blue Planet Surf YouTube channel. We'll keep coming out with more interviews. So thanks again, and we'll see you on the water. Aloha.